Let's spend a moment in prayer. Heavenly Father, as we come to the Word, let your Spirit, the true teacher, guide each of us to a place of submission to Jesus. May we each grow and develop. In Jesus' name, amen. We're taking a look at Jesus. And in so doing, we hope to fall in love with Him all over again and draw closer to Him. Today we're looking at a passage in John chapter 11, verses 38 through 44. We're continuing the story of Lazarus. So let's read this passage together in respect for God's Word. Let's stand. Together. Then Jesus, again groaning in himself, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of him who was dead, said to him, "Lord, by this time there is a stench, for he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not say to you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God?" Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead man was lying. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me, and I know that you always hear me. But because of the people who are standing by, I said this, that they may believe that you sent me." Now when he had said these things, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come forth." And he who had died came out bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Loose him and let him go." The Lord add his blessing to the reading of his word. You may be seated. The burial process in the first century was quite elaborate. It began at the moment of death. They didn't have a lot of material to be able to preserve the body. And so instantly they closed the person's eyes. They washed the person completely. And they began to layer his body, wrapping his feet together, the arms over the chest. They put a napkin and tied it over his head and put a cloth over his body, intermingling it with spices and perfumes, to keep the odor down, if you will, in the process. It began immediately, and within a few hours, the body was placed on a pier, poles with, that sort of thing, and then carried to the gravesite. Many of the bodies in the first, second, and third centuries were taken to tombs. Many were taken as well to what we would call a graveyard. But many were set in a tomb itself. And the burial was in a rock-hewn opening, much like this. And in it they had a bench, a seat, for the body to be carried into and laid. Now notice underneath, there's a couple of things and a couple of holes in the wall. You know what those things are? Those are ossuaries. This is an ossuary. About a year after the burial process, the family would come in. By this time, the body had totally decayed, and all that was left is bones. And they would place the bones in the ossuary. And then they would place them in those little cavities that you saw in the wall. Now, this practice only lasted a couple of hundred years. It stopped by the 3rd century. The ossuaries reflected the wealth of the person. It was a simple construction of limestone, and they've actually found 2 price tags on ossuaries. And the price of a standard limestone ossuary was about 1 denarii. That is, 1 day's wage. That was for the average person. they could be much more intricate. As a matter of fact, they have discovered within a 3-kilometer area about 750 ossuaries. Among them, they have found the ossuary of Joseph Caiaphas. Did anybody remember that name, Caiaphas, for any way? Josephus says the antagonistic priest to Jesus was named Joseph Caiaphas. This dates to the 1st century. Do you notice anything about this ossuary? It's much more elaborate. It actually contains the name on the side and writing on the back. I mean, it's very, very extensive. They've looked at the bones and discovered that the person who was in here was 65 years old and probably very wealthy. It would fit. This could be the bones of Caiaphas. You know, they found other things in more recent discoveries. They found one of a person that had been crucified. They know he was been crucified because the nail that was pinned into his feet was stuck in the heel bone. And it was so impacted that they couldn't get it out. And they discovered olive wood splinters at the end of the wood, which indicates the person had been crucified on an olive wood cross. In 2002, an ossuary was presented, and on the back was inscribed, James, the son of Joseph, the brother of Jesus. Oh man, I mean, this sent everybody into a frenzy. James, the author of the epistle. I mean, this could be his bones. Until 2009, when they discovered it was a forgery, and as a result, the persons were imprisoned for all the millions of dollars they had made. In 2007, the Discovery Channel said they had found the lost tomb of Jesus and purported to have found an ossuary with the name Jesus, the son of Joseph, the husband of Mary, and his children. Again, it was shown what? To be false. Do you know what the world is trying to do? Prove there is no resurrection. That Jesus wasn't resurrected. Whether it's the Da Vinci Code or whether it's these ossuaries they come up with, people are trying to discredit the fact that Jesus is God, the all-powerful God who raised from the dead. You know what we have in the story that's before us today? Absolute proof that Jesus has power over death. And he can resurrect the dead. And that's what we're going to see today. Jesus, our Jesus, the one that we love, is alive. And as he raised Lazarus from the dead, even so he himself was raised from the dead. And that's our hope, our confidence for today. When we look in the story, in the passage that's before us, the first thing that we see is hesitation. Not on the part of Jesus, but on everybody else's part. Here's the setting. You remember that Jesus had received a call from Mary and Martha, come heal our brother, he's sick. And what did he do? He dropped everything and ran as fast as he could. No, what did he do? He waited 2 days. And by the time he got there, Lazarus had been in the tomb 4 days. He was really, really dead. Now that's significant. Why? Because under Jewish thought, you remember what I told you, they thought the spirit hung around the body for 3 days. And by that time, the body began to decay, and the spirit then went to Sheol. That was just superstition thinking in the early tradition. So Jesus waited to the 4th day. Why? To show he was really, really dead. Not just sort of dead. but really, really dead. 4 days later, Jesus shows up. He greets Mary. He greets Martha. They both say the exact same thing to him, and he deals with them individually. Martha, the engineer, he gives teaching. Mary, the emotional, spiritual one, he gives words of comfort and hope. And then he comes to the tomb. And he says, take away the stone. And Mary says, Lord, he's dead. Do you know what I see about Martha at this time? She didn't understand what Jesus was trying to say when he said, you shall see the glory of God. Did she believe in Jesus? Did she believe that he was the Messiah? Martha believed that. But she didn't understand what Jesus was going to do. And so he was wanting to move the stone so he could deal with it. And what did Jesus say? He says, Martha, Martha, don't you want to see the glory of God? Do you understand that the resurrection is the glory of God? All of that's his glory. And that's what we have to look forward to. The glory that comes from that ourselves. And even though he's told her, she doesn't understand. I don't know who did at that point. And so they move the stone. What happened then? Jesus prayed. His prayer is very interesting because it's a public prayer. You understand public prayer? It's done where others hear you when you pray. I think we can learn a lot from Jesus' prayer here. It's a great deal. Jesus declares that this prayer is spoken for the benefit of the crowd. Did you catch that? He's not praying because the Father doesn't know what he's going to ask. He's not praying because the Father hasn't heard him. This is a prayer not for the benefit of Martha. Martha believed Jesus was the Messiah. Spiritually, she was okay. This prayer was not for the benefit of Mary. Mary believed in Jesus. Spiritually, she was okay. This prayer was not for the benefit of Lazarus. Lazarus was safe and firm in the hands of God. He was okay. But what about the people around him? Who were the people that were watching? The exact same people who a few days ago had done what? They had tried to kill him. They wanted to murder Jesus. He wasn't talking for the spiritual benefit of those that believed already. He was doing this so that the people there might come to faith in God. Do you catch that? That's his purpose. That's what he wanted them to do. He begins a very personal prayer. Abba, Father, Daddy. He begins his prayer with relationship. He wanted the people to understand he is his Father's Son, the only begotten Son, Jesus. And he wanted to reveal that this is the source of everything that is going on in his life. His power, everything is directly from the Father, from God himself. Father. And then he praises. I praise you that you have heard me at this moment in time. Now, catch this. I thank you what? There's a past tense verb here. Perfect. Complete. You have heard me. He hadn't said anything yet. Do you catch that? He hadn't said a word, and yet he already declared. What had the Father heard? Everything in Jesus' heart, the compassion he had for Mary and Martha. He knew already that He was going to raise Him from the dead. He knew everything in Jesus' heart, and He already knew it. You know what that teaches me about prayer? I don't have to say a word. God already knows. He already understands what's going on. Some of my deepest prayer has occurred in those times when I've come and said not a word to God, because I didn't have the words to say. And Jesus, at this time, comes to the Father, and the Father already knows. He's already heard Him. The Father's already taken care of it. And He thanks Him for that very thing. And then He declares His purpose. I am speaking out loud for the purpose of those who don't believe, that they may come to faith. I want them to know. And because they know that it's you, not a demon, not Satan, and that the things that I'm doing are in the power of the Spirit, and because Lazarus is going to come forth, and they're going to see a miracle such as never happened on the earth, that they will go, whoa, this is the Son of God. That's why He did it, and He declares it. In 2 short sentences, He states His purpose. He wants them to know that He is God's Son, and that He has been sent by God on a divine mission. And to prove it, He declares it publicly what's going to happen. Oh, by the way, what's the test of a true prophet in the Old Testament? What they say comes to pass. The test of a false prophet is they say something and it doesn't come true. And what do you do to a false prophet in the Old Testament? You build a monument to them with them under it. Oh, that we applied the same conditions today as back then. Oh, well, we won't go there. Jesus is not showing off. He's not playing the gallery. What is He doing? He's making a public stance to demonstrate exactly who He is. And what happens? We see a marvelous resurrection. A resurrection. The dead arise. Did you get this? Did you hear about the undertaker? It was a rainy day. He drove the hearse up top of the hill. The pallbearers get out. They grab the coffin. But it's so wet they slip and drop the coffin. It's so slick that the coffin takes off down the hill. And here goes the undertaker after trying to stop the coffin. And it goes out in the street, and it goes through the street, and there's a pharmacy across the street, and its doors are open, and the coffin hits the curb and goes through the door, goes through the front door and out the back, and here's the undertaker chasing through the pharmacy, and there's a pharmacist who steps in front of him. And the undertaker's breathing heavy. He says, and the pharmacist says, "Can you help me?" And he says, "Yeah, have you got anything to stop this coffin?" You know what I know about Jesus? He knows how to stop a coffin. You remember Nain? He goes into Nain, and here's a widow with her only son, and he's on the pier. They're carrying him out. He stops the coffin. And what happens? He raises the woman's son. Jesus really knew how to break up a grieving party, didn't he? Do you remember Jairus, his daughter? They were weeping all over the place, and Jesus said, "She's not dead, she's just sleeping." And they laughed him to scorn. Jesus knew how to stop a coffin. He did. He could bust up a good funeral anytime. And Lazarus was no different. You know what's amazing? Jesus says, Lazarus, come forth. Lazarus heard him. A dead man heard Jesus speak. Wow. And the dead respond to Jesus. He calls out loud, Lazarus, come forth. Demonstrating what? He wanted everybody to know what was happening. Do you know what wizards and all those others do? They do these incantations softly, so nobody can know what's going on. Jesus was public. Lazarus, come forth! And they could see whether or not he came forth, demonstrating exactly who he was. And understand this. Some commentators believe he called Lazarus by name because if he just said, come forth, all the dead would have come running out. Well, that may not be the case, exactly, but Lazarus heard. And I do believe the day is coming when Jesus will sound and the dead will rise. The trump of God, the voice of God, boom, boom, it's going to happen. There are a lot of similarities between Jesus' resurrection and Lazarus. You understand that Lazarus prefigures what Jesus is just going to do in a very short time. They both were dead and buried for days. They both came to life. There's some differences too. Lazarus came back to life only to die again. Jesus was raised in his glorified body, a body that could appear, disappear, go through walls, although he had a glorified body. But the overall picture that we see with Lazarus is the fact that Jesus has power over death and life. And he can command life in anyone. I'm thankful for that because I was once dead in my trespasses and sin. And you know what he did for me? Ron, come forth. And I came forth to life. I'm going to die again. That's the way of all men. But not unto death, but unto life in him. You see all that Jesus is in the midst of this? You see all that Jesus is as God? You look at his abilities. What can Jesus do? He has power. Matter of fact, the book of the Revelation says he's the Pantocrator. Panto means all. Krator means power. He is the all-powerful one. How much power does he got? I'll give you a hint. All. What can Jesus not do? Nothing. He can do anything. The biggest thing you can think of, Jesus can do it without batting an eye. He can do anything he desires to do, even command the dead. That's how much power that he has. And he showed it on numerous situations where he raised the dead. Additionally, he demonstrates his word. His word is true. Everything that he says comes to pass. When he said, I'm going to raise Lazarus, he raises Lazarus. Doesn't matter if he's been dead 4 days and his body stinks. 1 word, 2 words, 3 words, Lazarus come forth. And it happens. Just like that. His word is true. He has all authority. He has the authority to do anything he wants. Again, you look in Matthew 28. All authority in heaven and earth is given unto him. How much authority? All. And what does all mean? All. Except for, no, there's no exception. He demonstrates that he has the authority to do anything. And so Jesus commands. And even the dead obey. Wow. That is our God. Awesome. Mighty. Adam caused Lazarus to die, and Jesus caused Lazarus to live. Men bound Lazarus in grave clothes, and Jesus ripped them apart and rose him to life. That's our God. That's our Jesus. And that's what He does for us as well. Well, we ask ourselves, when I look at this passage, how's my life going to be different? You know, how do I become a better disciple? How do I fall in love with Jesus all over again? There's so many ways we could look at this passage and deal with them. Let me take just a couple of them that came to my mind and heart as I went through it. One, learn to pray like Jesus. I think that's a really good thing for us to do. Learn to pray for Jesus. You understand there's prayer and then there's prayer. Have you ever been in one of those desperate situations where, you poured out your heart and soul to God? Anybody besides me? I remember, there's been many times in my life, I remember one of the very first where, everything, part of my body was involved. My 3-year-old nephew named Robbie climbed up on the table where was the .38 handgun. He grabbed it, he put the barrel right here, took his thumb and pushed the trigger and shot himself. And he was in ICU for a long period of time. Missed all the vital organs. But he survived, and he's got 2 kids today. But I remember his mother, his dad, all of us praying with such intensity over this young boy. I've been through it in my own life in so many different ways. Jesus was under emotional stress. He wept at the graveside. And yet, in his prayer, what did he do? Did he sit there and beg God? Oh, God, please, 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 please. Or my favorite tactic, negotiate with God. God, if you would just answer this prayer, then I'll be a missionary to Africa, or I'll be good the rest of my life, or none of you have ever done that. How did Jesus pray? He prayed in relationship, Father. He came knowing already that the Father knew everything there was that He desired. He didn't have to spill it all out. He didn't have to rehearse it for hours on end. You know what He did? He used His prayer as an opportunity to express His confidence in the Father. How often do we do that in emergency situations? Do we stop and say, God, you're still in control? God, I'm confident that you already know my heart and that you're going to do what's best and right? Or do we lose it and doubt God? You know, another thing He did, and this is another thing I learned from His prayer, He prayed out loud. Here's a challenge for you. The next time you're with someone who is sick or has a physical need, grab their hand, put a hand on your shoulder, and pray out loud. For what purpose? To show off, see how well you can pray? Or to declare to those around, including the person, the confidence that you have in God that He's going to work and do something mighty. I think that would be a wonderful example. I'm not saying that God will do exactly what you say. You understand that? God has His own purpose, His own plan. But can we still express confidence in God and let others know that we think God can and will do things, though we don't always know what that will be? I think those are a couple of things that we can learn about prayer. I think another thing I was reading, and I thought this was an interesting application, is Jesus says, move the stone. Why did he have to move the stone? The stone is what kept Lazarus in the grave. So I got to thinking, are there any stones in our life that keep us from living life to the fullest? And I decided there's lots of stones. And sometimes we don't want to move the stones in our life. What are some of the stones? You know, some people are captivated by drugs, alcohol, and addictions. What do you got to do? Move the stone. Deal with it. Give it to Jesus. Let him remove that. Some people are held captive by money and possessions. What do you need to do? Move the stone. Deal with it. Again, give it to Jesus. Some are held captive by relationships, hurts, pain, anger. What do you need to do? Move the stone. God has provided for all of those things through his love and forgiveness. Move the stone. And you know what we need to do? Get rid of the chains that bind us to the world and the flesh and our sin. And instead, live the life of victory. 1 Corinthians 15:55 through 57. Thanks be to God who gives us victory. We have victory. It's ours to move the stone. And he grants us victory in every situation if we'll accept it, if we'll live it. The last thing. Jesus is the life giver. He gives life. He calls all of us to life. And I don't know where each and every one of you are. I trust that, like me, that you have each reached a point in your life when you've recognized the fact that you're a sinner separated from God, and you've turned to Jesus, who is the life giver, who says that because of our sin we are in death and dead in our trespasses and sin. And Jesus says, I will give you life. All you have to do is believe in me. And if you will believe in Jesus today, he will give you life. Life in all things. I didn't say it'd be easy. Did I say that? But he gives us life, a life of joy, a life of abundance in the midst of all things. We understand that in this world we live in death. Everyone in here has experienced death. A loved one, a relative, a friend. We all are going to experience death, apart from the Lord coming. But there is no fear. Because Jesus has given us life everlasting. That's not temporary. That's permanent. And though we will die physically, we are merely being graduated unto a much better life. And in the last days, when the dead are raised, he calls out, then we will experience life and blessing such as we have never experienced. And we'll have it forever and ever and ever, because Jesus gave us life.